I'd like to look at the game between Wei Yi and Fabiano Caruana from Norway Chess. I was very intrigued by the opening to this game, and it was a very sharp struggle that finished dramatically. So let me explain about the opening. So Wei Yi played e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6. Was Fabiano going to play a Kalashnikov? Who knows? But he went bishop b5. So the Roselimo. And if you've got my book, my Anti-Sicilians book, or indeed my Chessable course, you'll know that my recommendation against this is knight f6. And the other main moves here are g6 or the move that Fabiano played, e6. And of course, they're all reasonable, but anyway, my repertoire goes with knight f6. And there are lots of continuations here for white, but Wei Yi played c3, which is a little bit unusual. Now, the reason I'm interested in this position is because actually this can also arise in my repertoire in the Anti-Sicilians book. So let me explain. In this position, instead of bishop b5, white can play c3. And my recommended antidote against the Alapin is e6, with the idea d4 and d5 and so on. Bishop b5, etc. Knight f6 and so on. But instead of d4, if white wants to, white can play bishop b5 with a strange kind of Roselimo. And indeed, that's a transposition to this game, Wei Yi Caruana, but just via a different move order, playing c3 on the third move. And there we go. We've got a strange kind of Roselimo. So the players got it via this move order. So how should black react to this? Well, I don't think there's any reason why black shouldn't play d5, as I want to do against the Alapin anyway. And if pawn takes pawn, then this would transpose into the system I recommend against the Alapin. One could also play queen takes d5, because I'm not sure that the bishop is very well placed here, actually. And then just knight f6 and so on. So after d5, Wei Yi plays d3. And it's a funny kind of cross between a Roselimo and a Nimzo Indian defence with colours reversed. Here, Fabiano played bishop d7, which is okay, and, well, we'll see what happens. It's also possible to exchange queens. I think that's playable. It takes a little bit of time for white to organise everything, but no, it's safe enough for white. But I think this is a decent move, knight f6. So just putting a little bit more pressure here. And it's inviting white to play this kind of reversed Nimzo Indian position. You might recognise these doubled c-pawns, but normally white would have them on c3 and c4. And then c4 just blockades that one. But actually, this pawn isn't in trouble because it's well defended. And I think black can exploit the fact that this pawn has advanced very quickly. And it's possible to play like this, g5 and bishop g7 and queen c7. I think that's a really interesting line, actually. And potentially castle to kingside and even f6 sometimes. So I think this is quite reasonable. Knight f6. Of course, white could just play knight d2, but then bishop d7, and that seems fine for black. In any case, Fabiano played bishop d7. He clearly didn't want his pawns to be damaged. Queen e2, so be careful, the threat to take here. So knight e7. So black might be plotting to take here and go knight g6. Might be plotting to play g6 and bishop g7. maybe even queen c7 and castles queenside is an option. So h4 was played by Wei Yi. Now it starts to get very unusual. So clearly it's going to be difficult for black to get in knight g6 when h5 comes. And indeed, g6 doesn't look very pleasant because of h5. So that's why Caruana just played h5. Boom. No further. Just blocking white's h-pawn. Wei Yi castled. And black's in a little bit of a gum here. So Fabiano thought clearly that, while the king's in the middle, it's probably best to close the position with d4. So it makes the king a bit safer, basically. Now, if knight a3, if white just sort of continues developing normally, then knight g6 attacks that one. And e5, I mean, that's really what black wants, because can you see, normally, I mean, this is a kind of strange King's Indian formation with these pawns locked in the middle. But normally that light squared bishop would be over here. And actually that means that white's king side is a little bit weak. So I think black is absolutely fine there. So Wei Yi decided to undermine that pawn on d4 with b4. a6. Well, Caruana has nothing against bishop takes c6. And that straightens everything out. Bishop a4. And knight g6. So potential threat here. And preparing to bring this one in the game. And indeed the bishop defends c5. And that was taken. And black's pretty comfortable here, actually. Wei Yi exchanged, then exchanged here, and played bishop b2. The queen came back. So lots of exchanges, and now we've got opposite colour bishops, which, as we know from quite a lot of recent games, the opposite colour bishops actually give a particular character to the game. If one side is on the attack, it can be very difficult to just tamp down that attack because you simply can't exchange off those bishops. Now, if bishop takes g7, then rook g8, and suddenly there's a very nasty attack down here. So knight a3, best to bring out a knight. I think this is a very balanced position. There are things about black's position I really like. This bishop is great. At the moment it's blocked here, but you never know, it might be able to come here or here. And it somehow secures the queen side. This knight is kind of lurking at the moment. But yeah, this knight might sort of fly into the position. So knight c4, queen e6 protects this one. g3 finally protecting this one, and rook d8. So Caruana starts to press on that slightly sensitive d3 pawn. It could be interesting later on to attack it like this. And I think knight e3 now is a very understandable move. I think white, let's just put that back. I think white has to be a little bit careful here about this queen potentially coming in, and maybe this knight sacking here, maybe even a rook h6 swinging up the board. So I think knight e3 is very understandable. That kind of cuts out any attacks. That knight can always slip in here. So knight e7, well, if it's not going to be possible to give itself up to open the king side, then it seems right to move that knight back. It also covers f5, of course, stopping white's knight coming in. f4. So things getting really, really sharp. There is a downside to moves like this. I mean, it looks very aggressive, looks like great fun, but it does expose the king. One should always bear that in mind, not only along the second rank, but along this diagonal too. Bishop b5 hits that one. There you go, that bishop starting to look like quite an annoying piece from white's viewpoint. And e takes f4. I mean, generally I would like to play pawn takes pawn here to try and maintain this pawn front. But it's possible to play f5 to put some pressure on these points. And even this is possible. And, well, this endgame is about equal, basically. But rook takes f4 played. Now, black has to be careful about this, so f6. I mean, it looks right to blunt that bishop. I mean, it's a very unusual position. So we're at move 22. Black's king is still in the middle of the board. White's king is opened a little, but there are lots of white pieces around it, so no danger at the moment. Wei Yi played knight f5. This was a misjudgment. Knights are exchanged. And Fabiano plunged in with queen a2. I mean, it's such an unusual position that it's very hard to misjudge the situation. Wei Yi played here, and presumably he thought he was doing pretty well here. But Caruana's next move was superb. Castle kingside. Fantastic. Leaving that rook stranded on h5. And actually, this is a very good illustration of what happens when rooks are split. They're not working well together, whereas black's rooks are connected. This bishop is in a nice position. Looking at that sensitive pawn. This bishop is blunted. I mean, at the moment, there's a pin anyway. But black's pieces simply coordinate far better than white's. Yeah, if this rook tries to come back, then it's possible to take this. And queen b1 check. There you go. See, that king is a little bit exposed. Or if king h2, it's really what you want to do, trying to give the king some cover, then queen b3. And that pawn is in trouble. So rook a1 played. And the queen came back to f7. Rook f5. Now, there's a very pleasant choice between bishop takes or rook takes. Fabi played rook takes d3, which looks very nice because there's a threat here. And if, let's say, king h2, then rook d8. I mean, look at these pieces. Beautiful. Threatening rook d2. If queen g2, rook e3. Threatening here and here. So, for example, rook a3, this, and rook d2. That's going to win material. Or if rook f2, rook d3. At this moment, white is starting to think, why did I advance that f-pawn? See, it's just weakened the king side. Okay, but had Fabiano overlooked a tactic? Rook takes bishop, played. Right. Shall we have a quick think and drink moment? You think, I drink. Black to play. What did Fabiano do? You've probably seen this already. Queen c4. Game over. Defends the rook. And threatens rook takes g3. And attacks this one. So if rook takes b7, then rook g3 check. Hits the queen. Check. Rook g2. And that detaches the king from the queen. And that's game over. Nice finish. Nice tactical finish from Caruana. Just coming back to the opening again. As I said, this position, bishop b5 and c3, oops, c3, it's possible to get through this move order. That's my repertoire move order. And then bishop b5. But it seems to me that d5 is a pretty simple solution. You know, if I can put a pawn in the middle, I'm usually very happy. I think black is absolutely fine there. And yeah, I mean, the way Fabiano played it was very unclear. He was okay. But it looks to me like knight f6 is just a really straightforward way of playing the position, actually. But anyway, I leave that up to you to decide which way you want to play. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching.